Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov. Today is Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the month of transition from Pesach to Shavuot. And our Torah service follows our virtual communal singing of Hallel, which is a separate link. This Shabbat, our Torah journey through the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, continues. Today we encounter a strange disease called Tzaraat, which can be contracted by human beings, by walls, by stones, or even cloth. Tzaraat has been translated variously as scaly disease, eruption, and erroneously leprosy, which it isn't. Not surprisingly, the first question we ask is, well, what is it? What is this disease? If that is even what we're talking about. It seems to be some kind of skin condition, but it's not restricted to humans. Like a fungus or mildew, it can jump from humans to our environment, our clothing, our homes, our walls. Only a Kohen can determine if a person or home is afflicted, prescribe the required quarantine, and only a Kohen can declare it gone. In the absence of this diagnosis, a person may be sick, but there is no official quarantine. Kohanim were not doctors. Their role was to determine if a person or object was tameh or tahor for ritual purposes, for being allowed to enter the precincts of the Mishkan. Probably other folks were healers. Tameh, tahor. So, to go any further, what are these categories? Tuma and tahora, usually terribly mistranslated as impurity versus purity. But that's not what these terms mean. In fact, both are normal parts of life. They are spiritual conditions that arise as a consequence of living, even of living well, even of living fully. Tzaraat. This mysterious skin condition is not the primary source of Tuma. Death is. Touching death. In Torah, literally touching any corpse, renders the person who had that experience tameh for 7 days, a full cycle of creation. Yet, we touch death just by living. What happens when we touch death? Isn't death normal? Well, we say it is. Death is part of life. But right now we see that the impact of death that invades our days is shaking us to the core. The Kessler Rabbi said that it is not possible for a human being to touch death and not curse God. Death is just so outrageous and impossible. How can anything be alive one moment and dead the next? How can anything be alive one moment and the next not? You were so alive. How can you now be dead? It is impossible to accept until we must. And then we mourn, we grieve, we cry, heal. Eventually, we reaffirm life and live. During that time of touching death, we are in an eerie state, not whole, needing time to heal as much as we can. We are tameh. Tameh. Tahor. We see that there are times that we can affirm life and move forward, and times when the gears of life grind and the engine stalls. Time to withdraw. Turn inwards. Turn towards the inner work that is called for. A mourner leaves the house and walks around the block in the company of family or friends after Shaloshim. Says Kaddish daily for as much as 11 months. Gradually reaffirming life. The Mayim Chaim of Mikveh aids someone who is tameh in rebooting life intention, rebirthing into life affirmation and going forward. Tzara'at is the second most severe kind of tumah. The Mishnah, in a curiously contemporary way, says that sufferers may be quarantined for as much as, 2 weeks before being positively diagnosed. Torah says they must dwell outside the camp or outside the city walls, tear their clothes, muss their hair, mask their mouths, and when anyone comes near, they must cry out a warning, Tameh, Tameh Yikra. Perhaps in antiquity, a tzara'at victim appeared like a living corpse, the body somehow being eaten away by this disease. People ran from the contagion and isolated quarantined sufferers outside the camp. Mikveh, and in antiquity, other more ancient rituals of rebirthing bring us back. Bring us back into Tahora, affirming life. Today we will read from the exquisite 300-year-old Torah scroll that Jack's father rescued from Nazi-occupied Paris. My parents' generation, his parents' generation, touched the megadeath of World War and concentration camps. This past Tuesday was Yom HaShoah, lest we forget. The huge collective tumah of that is still with us. Now we are in the throes of a pandemic. We do not know who will live and who will succumb. We touch death collectively with greater ferocity than most of us have ever in our lifetimes. Like tzara'at victims, we quarantine and hope not to ever test positive. And if we do, we pray that we may recover and return to life and live. There is much more that can be said about this. This morning, when we read this section of Torah, we will call you, if you wish, to rise into a place with your prayer for our whole world, to learn from this collective tumah that we are in. And when we can, however we can, to help birth our society onto a new, truly life-affirming path for all the people and creatures of this planet. A truly luminous Tahora. Shabbat Shalom, we enter the gate of Torah. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo.
Gadlul Adonai iti uneromema Shemo Yachdav. As we prepare for this Aliyah, again we call you, if you wish, to rise in your place with your prayer for our world, that our world might learn from this tzara, from this collective tuma that we are in, and that we might, when we can, be part of a great rebirthing, birth our society into a truly life-affirming path, a truly luminous Tahora.
ויעזור ויגן וישיר לכל החוסים בו ונאמר אמן. הכל המוגדל אלינו נכבוד לתורה, יעמדו לתורה. ברוך שנתן תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו, ואתם הדבקים באדוני אלוהיכם חיים כולכם היום.
We who are rising for this Aliyah join together in your favorite version of the Torah Prager. Baruch et Adonai HaMorach, Baruch Adonai HaMorach le'olam va'ed, Baruch Adonai HaMorach le'olam va'ed,
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר בחר בנו יחד החיים, ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני, נותן התורה. וידבר אדוני אל משה ואל אהרון לאמור, אדם כי יהיה באור בשרו שעית או ספחת או בהרת, ורע באור בשרו נגע צרעת, והוא בא אל אהרון הכהן או אל אחד מבניו הכהנים, וראה הכהן את הנגע באור בשר ושיער, והנגע הפך לבן, ומראה הנגע עמוק באור בשרו נגע צרעת היא, וראו הכהן וטימא אותו. ואם בהר לבונה היא באור בשרו ועמוק אין מראה מן האור, ושערו לא הפך לבן, והזכיר הכהן את הנגע 7 ימים, וראה הכהן ביום השביעי. והנה הנגע עמד בעיניו, לא פסע הנגע באור, הזכירו הכהן 7 ימים שנית. Now Adonai speaks through Moshe and Aharon, saying, a person who is afflicted with any manner of illness that shows any manner of discoloration or scales or sick appearances on any part of the person's body, this indeed needs to be looked at by the Kohen. The Kohen will therefore engage in a complete examination of the person. And by virtue of doing this exam, the Kohen will be rendered tameh for the entire day. And if indeed it looks like signs of sickness, the Kohen will have this person shut away for 7 days of quarantine. And then on the 7th day, the Kohen will come again and examine. And if indeed the sign of sickness has not disappeared, this person will be shut away for another 7 days. And after that time, after the 7th day, second time around, indeed the illness has disappeared, then the Kohen will be in a position to clear this person and call him tahor. However, if the illness is spread into the person's clothing, whether it be the warp or the woof of the fabric thereof, any aspect of the person's clothing, showing different kinds of signs of infection of different colors. והבגד אשר יהיה בו נגע צרה, בבגד צמר ובגד פשתים, ובשתי או בערב לפשתים, ולצמר או באור, או בכל מלאכת אור, והיה נגע ירקרק או בדם, בבגד או באור, או בשתי או בערב, או בכל כלי אור, נגע צרתי והרע את הכהן. This will be shown to the Kohen, who will examine it carefully, and the clothing will have to be shut off 7 full days. If after that time the Kohen sees again that indeed the infection has not left any part of the clothing, then the Kohen will ordain that the entire clothing must be completely burned, because it is rendered tameh and cannot be worn anymore. וידבר אדוני אל משה ואל אהרון לאמור, speaking now to Moshe and Aaron, you will eventually come and settle in your land, and you will have regular settled houses, and you will see at some point that there is an infection that shows up in the stones of your house. וידבר אדוני אל משה ואל אהרון לאמור, כי תבואו אל ארץ כנען אשר אני נותן לכם לאחוזה, ונתתי נגע צרה בבית ארץ אחוזתכם, ובאשר לו הבית והגיד לכהן לאמור, כנגע נראה לי בבית. The resident of that house will come to the Kohen saying, this happened to me, I see a sign of infection in my house. The Kohen will then that the house has to be separated, a barrier has to be made between the house and other houses near it, and will come and see everything that is the case inside the house. ואחר כן יבוא הכהן לראות את הבית, ורואת הנגע היא נגע בקירות הבית. And indeed, the illness has somehow jumped into the very stones of the house. Any sign of illness, strange white, green, red, it doesn't look good on the walls. And the Kohen will then come out of the house to the outside of the house. And the house itself will be put in quarantine for 7 days. After that time, the Kohen will come back again and look at the walls of the house from the inside. V'tziva Kohen, and then at this point, the stones which are showing signs of illness will be removed from the house. Any part of the house that is showing stain will be taken and cast into a place Tameh, outside of the settled areas. And if after this, the signal of the illness, the signs of toxicity are still showing and still growing and somehow flowering inside the house, the whole house must be taken down, all of its stones, the foundation, the dirt underneath the house. It all has to be dismantled and carted away outside the city, El Makom Tameh, to a place of Tameh. And anybody who's come into the house at that time will have to also be Tameh until the evening. Anybody who has slept in the house will be also Tameh and will have to completely change all their clothing. After this, the foundations and the land under the house can be rebuilt, and a new house be built again. Zot haTorah l'chol nega hatzaraat. This now is the Torah of the spread of illness from persons through their clothing to their dwellings, to the outside world. ולשאת, ולספחת ולבהרת, ולהורות ביום הטמא, ולהורות ביום הטמא וביום הטהור. To make a difference between that which is tameh and that which tahor, that which is in a state of toxicity and that which is clear. This now is the Torah of Metzora. Zot Torah HaMetzora. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu torat emet v'chaye olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
So beautiful friends, our Mishuberach for all of us who have felt called to Torah this morning takes the form of our healing prayer. And so we invite everyone who is viewing to reach towards Torah, reach towards one another, and reach towards Torah with our prayer for our whole world, to learn from this collective Tumah, to learn from this terrible time, from this pandemic. And when we can, to rebirth our society and our world onto a new, truly life-affirming path. We invite everyone, as we call out the ancient words that Moshe Rabbeinu called out when Miriam was stricken with, ostensibly, tzaraat. And she was healed. He sang to God, Ana Please call out the names of those to whom you would wish that the healing prayers of everyone who is viewing at this time be sent through your heart to them. We ask for a complete healing for all of us, for all of those stricken, whether at home or in hospital, for medical care workers who daily risk their lives to save life. We ask for a complete healing for our towns, villages, cities, and world, for all people and creatures, a healing of spirit and a healing of body. B'mhira b'yameinu, speedily, and in our day, today would be good.
Amen.
We stay present, standing as the scroll is lifted.
V'zot ha'Torah asher san Moshe libnei Yisrael al pi Adonai v'yad Moshe Yisrael ve'oraita kudesh b'riuchahu Yisrael ve'oraita kudesh b'riuchahu Torah, a life-affirming path for all the people and creatures of this planet. A world of shalom, wholeness, completeness,
fulfillment, perfection. Od Yavo Shalom, Aleinu. Shalom, wholeness, completion, fulfillment, perfection is there waiting for us. Od Yavo Shalom,
Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom 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 Aleinu.
Holding in our hearts a vision of a healed and perfected world, we offer at this time a Kaddish Yatom, a mourner's Kaddish, in behalf of all of those whose souls are traveling in the higher realms. If you're in a time of mourning, or observing a yahrzeit, or perhaps if it is your custom to rise into a mourner's Kaddish in behalf of all of those who perish and have perished with no one to say Kaddish for them, do rise in your place at this time. Yitgadal, Yitgadash Shemei Rabbo.
Amen.
Be'omad Divra Chirutei, Be'amlich Malchutei, B'chai Echon, U'v'yom Echon, U'b'chayei B'chol Beit Yisrael, V'agala B'zman Kari V'imru Amen, Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam U'lomei Omayah, Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar V'yitalev V'yitalal Shemei D'Kudeshah, La'ela Min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran b'yoma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru
Amen.
amen. And may there be a soul ascent from world to world for all of those for whom Kaddish Yatom was offered this morning. We close our Torah service and this gathering with a melody that is even now coming around on the guitar.
Ein Eloheinu Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom.
Chodesh Tov, beautiful friends. Thank you for joining us this morning.